So we are at the end of another year, right? It's December 31st. It comes every year, right? December 31st. It's there. It's on the calendar, right? We actually, this year is kind of special because we get an extra Sunday this year, right? Yeah. Normally there's only 52 Sundays. This year is 53, so that's pretty cool, right? Anyway, so we get this extra Sunday, but it's December 31st, end of the year, and when we get to the end of the year, we always kind of start to kind of look back through the year and what we've experienced and what has happened in this last year and what we've done and not done and what we've experienced and haven't experienced and kind of just process through that a little bit. This week when I was doing that, I realized this last year was actually a pretty boring year for me. So simply quit my job, in April. Had a daughter who graduated from college first, and then 2 weeks later she got married. So kind of boring there. And then I found a new job. That was pretty cool, and got ordained. That took a little bit of time. And then moved to Redding. So decided, hey, we'd come and move to Redding and then live with somebody else for a few months while we're living in Redding. That's always good. And then we sold our house and bought a new one and moved into that house and then had our whole family come over for Christmas. So pretty boring year, right? And just not a lot going on. Maybe some of you have had that kind of boring year. Maybe some of you, it literally has been kind of boring and routine, and there hasn't been a lot of difference going on, and just kind of your usual kind of year. But whatever it is, as we kind of look back through the year, then as we've evaluated that, then we look to the next year and, okay, now what do we expect? We begin to maybe get excited about what the new year has. Maybe some of us are a little scared. Maybe we see transitions coming in our life and things are going to change this next year. And so we begin to worry about that a little bit or become anxious. But whatever it is, it's just kind of the typical thing we do. We process through kind of the last year and then looking to the next year. The reality is that life is cyclical, right? It just kind of goes around in a circle over and over again. And the seasons are that way too, right? We have winter we're in now, and then spring to come, and summer and fall, and just kind of part of that kind of cyclical nature of life. Some of us, however, probably like some of the seasons more than others. How many love winter? Anyone? Yeah, a couple maybe. Yeah, I guess I kind of like winter. Yeah, some of us like winter, and most of us probably don't, depending on kind of what you like weather-wise or whatnot. And how about spring? How about spring is your favorite time of year? Okay, yeah, a lot of those. Spring's kind of, that's everybody kind of, I don't know, not everybody, but spring seems to be pretty fun. Summer, anybody like summer? Yeah, I'm actually a big summer fan. I know people around here are like, triple digits, what do you want that for? But no, I actually love that. I think it's great and excited about experiencing a Redding summer next year. We got a little bit of it this year, but I'm hoping to get a full on next year, right? And see how I like it. But and then fall. Anybody like fall? Yeah? So we like fall, we like spring, we like, summer. Winter is usually kind of the ugly stepchild of the seasons, right? No one likes that. But it's just a reality, right? The seasons that we go through, there's kind of this cyclical nature of life. And there's seasons and times that we like, and there's seasons and there's times that we don't like. But what I want to bring to us today is just an understanding that God has given us all of life. That all of the human experience is actually an opportunity for blessing, and that it is in itself a blessing from the Lord. That not just the good times or the seasons that we like, those aren't the only place where we find blessing. That God actually has given us the times we don't like as a blessing as well. And so as we do that, I've came to the passage in Ecclesiastes chapter 3, verses 1 through 8. You can turn in your Bibles there because we're going to sit on this passage this morning and not going to be jumping around like I've been doing that with the different Advent messages. But so if you want to turn there, you can. These are familiar verses that you probably are well aware of. Songs been written about them, and maybe some of you will break out in song as I read through them. That's fine if you need to. Actually, Wanda, her phone went off and was playing a song this morning in the early service, so that was fun. But you don't have to play it on your phone. But anyway, just think about these words as I read them. Again, Ecclesiastes 3, verses 1 to 8. There is a time for everything and a season for every activity under heaven. A time to be born and a time to die. A time to plant and a time to uproot. A time to kill and a time to heal. A time to tear down and a time to build. A time to weep and a time to laugh. A time to mourn and a time to dance. A time to scatter stones and a time to gather them. A time to embrace and a time to refrain. A time to search and a time to give up. A time to keep and a time to throw away. A time to tear and a time to mend, and a time to be silent and a time to speak. A time to love and a time to hate. A time for war and a time for peace. This passage has in it these extremes throughout. You know, just looking at verse 2, a time to be born and a time to die. The beginning of life and the end of life. You know, these extremes that it looks at throughout all 8 verses, just over and over again. Time for this and then a time for the other side, the extreme opposite of that. And as a result, what we see is that each of these extremes have a time and a place in human experience, in human life. And not only do they have a time, but they're actually given to us by God. That God has blessed us with these extremes of life, and of course, everything in between. That's the point of this passage, is that all of these things have their allotted times that we will experience in life. And because they have their allotted times, we should seek to find blessing in them. That God has given them to us as a gift. And so this morning's message, I want to look at these extremes and then try to find out where those blessings are. What I have done is I've taken basically each verse, starting with verse 2 through verse 8, and in each of those verses, I have identified a particular blessing that God is seeking to give us in that. Kind of a theme of that verse. And so this morning, we will look at each of those verses individually. I'll give you what I think is the theme there, and then we'll talk about the extremes in that theme and how both are a blessing. All right, so let's begin. The blessing of life, verse 2. A time to be born and a time to die. A time to plant and a time to uproot. I have rewritten this verse in kind of my own words to try to kind of drive home what I think is the point of the theme of this verse, and it is as follows. It's a time for new life and a time for life to end. It is the blessing of life. All of us love birth, right? New birth is just an amazing thing, right? And we get to enjoy this new life and all the excitement of 9 months waiting for this new life to arrive, you know, a human baby, right? We get all excited about there, and there's a lot of anxiety and excitement. And then when the baby is born, there's so much excitement as you look forward and think about the possibilities for this child and the things that we hope for with this child and the blessings that we hope that this child will experience and that we'll experience as a result. I remember each of my 3 childs in their births, and each of them had kind of a different kind of theme that went with them, right? Our first son was Junior, Sean Jr., and he was our first child, and I admit freely that the theme of this birth was fear. I was 20 years old, 21 years old, I had no idea what it meant to be a dad, and really I don't even know if I had ever held a baby before, and here I'm having a kid, it's going to be mine. I'm like, whoa, what's going on, right? And then the birth itself was pretty traumatic. It wasn't an easy birth, and there was things going on that freaked me out. And matter of fact, at one point, the nurses, moved me out of the room because they looked like I was about to faint, and I was. And then they brought me back in after I kind of chilled out a little bit, and everything was fine, and we had our son, our first child. And it was a blessed event, but there was fear involved in that. Next was our daughter, Rose. And remember that one because that birth was kind of surrounded by joy. We didn't know the gender of our child, and so we go to the hospital and expectant and excited, and we were both hoping for a girl because we had our boy, and now we want this girl, right? And so we're really excited about that. And when the doctor finally tells us after Rose has been born that it's a baby girl, I remember my wife and I both kind of cheering, yeah, we got a girl, right? It was like we won the game, right? It was great. And our third child was Olivia. And Olivia, the theme of her birth was peace. It was the first time that my wife had finally got the epidural she'd always wanted, and we were in the delivery room, and she was dilated as 9, and we're playing cards and having a good time. And we remember the other 2 births, and it was like not that it dilated at 9. No, it was chaos, right? And this time she's chilling and cool. The doctor walks in and says, "All right, it's time to have a kid." And we're like, "Sweet, let's do this," you know. And she lays back, boom, pops out the kid, and there we go. Woo-hoo. It was great. So just peace, right? But all of these children, right, every one of them was different, and we had expectations and excitement and hope, right, for these new children. And new life always does that, even with a garden, right? When you plant something new, you're excited about what those flowers are going to look like, or how that greenery is going to just add to the rest of the yard and the house. And this is true of new birth, and it's easy to find blessing there. But what about the other extreme, the death side? And I just want to say again that death is actually grace. That especially for us as Christians, that we do, you know, that death is not the end. You know, that with death comes something beautiful, that we recognize that death is that transition point in our life where we leave this world and we get to go and be in the eternal world, right? Death is that grace because we don't have to live our whole life in this sinful and evil and fallen world. That we don't have to continue to endure the struggle of this world. That we know that when we die, we are transitioned into eternity, into this perfect world, into this world that brings peace and joy and happiness forevermore. Even Paul saw this when he wrote in Philippians 1:21, "For to me, to live is Christ, and to die is gain." So life, it's a blessing. Both the birth, the new life, and the death, the end of life. Next, we have the blessing of change. Verse 3, "A time to kill and a time to heal, a time to tear down and a time to build." I have rewritten this to say basically, or simply this: a time to end and a time to begin or restart is the blessing of change. Change is hard for many of us. We struggle with the concept or even the idea or even stepping into change. We sometimes can get very comfortable with our life, especially as Americans. We seem to have everything we need and want. And yeah, there's always a few things that we'd like to add or get someday, but we can be pretty content with what we have. And so when change comes, we can get a bit freaked out by it, a little nervous and don't know what's to come, right? Change is different, and it's going to be, maybe chaotic and scary. And so sometimes we, just try to avoid change. But we need to understand that God has given us change and that there's beautiful blessings in change. That there is a time for things to change, to start something new. Now, many of us can, even when it comes to change, if we don't like change, we can look at something new and go, "Oh, that can be exciting," right? We start a new job and we can get excited about it and think, "Oh, the possibilities of that new job can be maybe pretty fun," and we can think about the things that are possible and can encourage us. But also, some of us can find that it's kind of scary to start something new, right? We don't know. I mean, we have maybe dreams of something possible and good, but there's also those nightmares of something horrible and evil that'll happen, right? And so those changes to something new can be really scary sometimes and hard for us to find those blessings. But God has given it to us for a reason. He's given us those blessings for a reason. And there is amazing blessing in doing something new. But there's also amazing blessing in ending something. To stop doing something. And we sometimes don't think about that. Change is not just something new that we're going to do. It also means that we're leaving something old, something that we have done. And we need to recognize that God has blessing for us in those old things as well. That it's not just the new thing that's going to bring a blessing, but the stepping away from the old thing has blessing as well. Next, we have the blessing of emotion, verse 4. "A time to weep and a time to laugh, a time to mourn and a time to dance." In my version of this verse, it's simply a time for sorrow and a time for joy. The blessing of emotion. Again, we have this extreme of celebration and joy and sorrow and mourning. We all kind of love joy. We all love, to have something to celebrate. We just done that for the last week, right? We've had these celebrations around the holidays, and even tonight we're going to probably have celebrations of a new year and the old year and all the excitement that comes from that. And we love the joy piece, and it's easy for us to find the blessing in the joy, that God allows us to experience these great seasons of joy. But how about the sorrow? Can we find blessing in the sorrow? Because sorrow is usually something we do not like. We as Americans actually are really bad at sorrow. We really struggle with mourning. We have this tendency to kind of say, oh, you just got to have a stiff upper lip kind of mindset, that you got to be strong, and kind of work through this, and this kind of don't cry kind of thing, mentality, right? We don't allow each other to just be sorrowful and cry and to mourn. There certainly are things in this world that should be mourned. When we lose a family member or a friend to death, and even though we as Christians have hope for the future and eternity and that we get to see them again, there's still a reason for mourning. We've got that separation of relationship, and there's a reason for us to spend some time in sorrow. The thing is that God has given us amazing blessing through sorrow. But some of us refuse to enjoy that blessing. We fight off sorrow and mourning as much as we can, and no, I'm not going to engage with that because it's just too hard. But for those of us who are willing to engage and allow ourselves to mourn, God has an amazing blessing for us in that. It's how He heals our hearts. It's how He makes us healthy and keeps us healthy. There are certainly people in this room that are very familiar with sorrow. And I'm sure many of you have walked through that and have now enjoyed the amazing blessings of that. But if anyone is here and they're refusing or resisting going into that sorrow and time of mourning, let me encourage you. God is there. He's waiting for you in that mourning and in that sorrow. He wants to meet you there and to bless you. Next, we have the blessing of relationship. Verse 5, a time to scatter stones and a time to gather them, a time to embrace, and a time to refrain from embracing. My version is a time for closeness and a time for letting go. That's the blessing of relationship. Again, family members and close friends, we love those good and healthy relationships. I mean, we've all had friends that, always with us, and the friends that we just love to be around, the friends that we spend lots of times with and holidays with, and family members that we love and just enjoy being with and doing fun stuff together, and again, celebrating holidays together. My wife and I have had several different friends throughout our married life together that were just amazing and awesome friends that we would spend sometimes 3 or 4 nights a week with, where literally we just kind of like that morning or that afternoon call up and say, hey, what are you doing for dinner tonight? Oh, I don't know, let's get together. And so we just get together just spontaneously all the time, just because we just loved to be together. It was always fun and always a good time. And so it's easy for us to find the blessings of relationship in that kind of sense, right? But there's also blessing in letting go of family, letting go of those close friends sometimes. God calls us sometimes to move on. To go to a new area, and just in our life, Debbie and I, coming to this church, we left some very good friends. Before that, going to Richland Church, we left some very good friends in our church in Ferndale. And so we've had to do this a couple of times, and every time it's really hard. It's hard to walk away from those relationships knowing that your life has been so wrapped up in those relationships, and it's hard to look at what's next and go, how is it possibly ever going to be like this again? And even now, as Debbie and I are in the midst of this transition of friendship, that we recognize the gap that's still there, and we know we've still got a ways to go before those friendships will be developed here. But here's the reality. God has a blessing in this. That because we were willing to let go of those friends, we have the opportunity to develop new friends, to be changed by these new relationships, to be encouraged and to encourage new people. God is expanding our exposure to people for our benefit and for theirs. And this is a reality that we all get to face. There are times when our friendships are going to end. And instead of looking at those times when our friendships end as just negative, may we realize that God has a blessing in it. That by taking away that relationship, we now have an opportunity for new relationships. Next, we have the blessing of purpose. Verse 6, a time to search and a time to give up, a time to keep and a time to throw away. In my version, a time to pursue passion and a time to surrender it. The blessing of purpose. All of us probably have a passion, something that we love to do, that we have maybe poured our life into. Maybe some of us are working in our passion. Maybe some of us just do it as a hobby on the side. But we all have something that we're passionate about and we drive and strive to do and participate with. And it's an amazing thing to have those purposes in life. The things that kind of get us up in the morning, get us out of bed, give us a reason to kind of go through the day. It's great to have purpose. It's great to have passion. It's good for us to see that and to be a part of that and to be involved in that. And it's easy for us to recognize the blessings of having a passion and being able to participate in it. But can we find blessing when we have to give up that passion? Or when we lose that purpose? Or when we hand off that purpose to someone else? For me, it was youth ministry. It was a passion of my life for 20-some years. This was kind of what I did. That's why I spent my time doing. I loved doing that. It was never a chore. It is what got me up in the morning, to get up and knew that I get to spend time with teenagers that day, or get time to just hang out with people and to be a part of their life, and to see teenagers change make their decisions for Christ. To be going one direction, and all of a sudden one day they decide to go for Christ. It was just so exciting and so fun and so awesome. It's something I love to do. And so when God began to call me into the lead pastor, I was like, wait a second, God, there's a problem here. This is my passion. This is what I've done for 20 years. What are you asking me to do? You want me to just give that up? And his answer was yes. His answer was, yes, you need to give that up because I've got something different for you. I'm going to give you a new passion. And it's true that I still love teenagers and still love to hang out with them and want to be with them as much as I can. But God is and has changed that passion. I've given it up. I've passed it off to someone else. And I've begun something new. And I'm beginning to enjoy the amazing blessing of not only doing something new for myself and working in a new passion that I never thought I'd be a part of, but also to see, it is so awesome to see what God is doing through the people that I've handed that passion off to. When I talk to the youth directors that are leading the ministry in Richland, it's so awesome to hear what God is doing, how God is blessing them, how God is using them. There's amazing blessing when we let go of our passion. Next, we have the blessing of conflict. How can there be a blessing in conflict? Verse 7, a time to tear and a time to mend, a time to be silent and a time to speak. And in my version, a time to defend rights and a time to concede them. The blessing of conflict. None of us here probably like conflict. We, as good human beings, we do whatever we can to avoid conflict, right? You just ignore it, right? Or perhaps we're kind of militant and we control it, right? We're just going to be kind of bullies and we're going to push people around so no one would ever come and have a conflict with us because we're just, we're out in front and we're pushing things, right? We do all kinds of stuff to try to avoid real conflict. But there's times when we need to engage in conflict. There's times when we need to say something. There's times when we need to stand up for our rights or for someone else's rights. There's times when we can't just let it go anymore. We need to step up and stand in the gap, and we need to address the situation. We need to have the courage to get off the couch and to stand up to someone and say, all right, here's my beef. Here's my issue. This is what you have done. This is how you have violated this particular right. We have to have courage to do that, and there's blessing in that. We don't understand oftentimes because we spend our whole lives avoiding conflict. And so we never experience the amazing blessing of engaging in conflict. Many churches, many families, and many friendships have been destroyed simply because no one had the courage to engage in conflict. God has given us opportunities through conflict, opportunities of blessing. But we have to step into it. We can't just go, oh, conflict is all bad, all evil, and I'm going to stay away and avoid it. It's like we think conflict is sin. Conflict is not sin. There is an amazing opportunity within conflict for those relationships to go deeper than they ever could have before if we're willing to engage. Amazing blessing through engaging in conflict. Now that I've said that, let me sound like I contradict myself and say that there are times when we need to just concede the fight. There are times when we don't engage in conflict. There are times when we just need to step back and say, you know what? It's okay. And this is just as hard because some of us have a fairness, kind of meter in our brains that doesn't like that. Some of us are like, wait a second, that's not fair, and we got to stand up for what's fair. And so we push and push and push in order to get our rights or even someone else's rights, be able to support them and defend them. But sometimes we just need to let it go. And when we do, there's amazing blessing in that as well. Because sometimes when we're willing to just step back for a second, all of a sudden, the big picture becomes clear. And we realize the one that we thought was evil incarnate is actually just a broken, sorrowful, pained person that needs to be loved. Next, the blessing of justice. Verse 8. A time to love and a time to hate. A time for war and a time for peace. My version, a time to enjoy just rule and a time to confront injustice. That's the blessing of justice. We all love peace. We enjoy those times when we all get together. It's the holidays, and so there's lots of family usually around us and friends and that kind of stuff. And especially with family, it's always great when the holidays, there's no conflict, right? We make it through and everybody gets along really well, and there's, no passive-aggressive, things going on in the background, or somebody gets bent out of shape about something. We just all have a really good time together, and it's just all fun. We all love that, right? Those times of peace, right? And everyone is getting along, and people are doing the right thing and acting the right way and saying the right things, and it's a beautiful thing. It's not hard for us to find the amazing blessings of peace, right? To be able to engage in that and to enjoy that time. Even in this country, we have enjoyed peace for the most part, right? And that we can relax and there's no fear, right? And there's good things there. However, there's also a time for war. We all seem to kind of hate war. We hate, that part. And in America, we've got this kind of this mantra that basically, if everyone just loved each other, then we'd all be great. We just need more love in the world. We have a religion of love, actually, in America. That if everyone loved everybody better, then we'd all be filled with love and happiness and joy, and there'd be no bad things ever happen, and it would just be this, utopia of beautiful love fest, right? This is really the religion that we have. But what they mean by love is they mean that we're not going to judge anyone. What they mean by love is that there's tolerance, this idea that, we're just going to live and let live, that everyone can live whatever way they want and it's okay. And that we have to not only embrace their way of living not only do we have to allow them to live the way they want, but we have to embrace the way that they live. But the reality is that is not love. Because love is moral. Love is just. There is a right and there is a wrong. I'm not saying that we need to go around and, destroy the world. What I am saying is that there is a time for war. There's a time when we need to stand up against evil. And that doesn't look like our love that this world is selling us. It doesn't look tolerant. It doesn't look embracing. But we have to, if we're going to really love the world, if we're going to really love correctly, then we have to go to war sometimes. Matter of fact, we saw a couple of weeks ago that we have a God who is just, but his justness comes out of the fact that he is a God of love. That he loves, that's why he's just. If he wasn't just, then he wouldn't love us. But because he loves us, he is just. He has a moral code that he has given us and handed down to us and said there is right and there is wrong. And we need to stand up for what is right. There are times when we need to go to war. And there is blessing in that. Consider the Israelites when they came into the promised land. They were blessed by the war that they fought. God blessed them through that because evil was destroyed and true love was celebrated and brought into the land. Sometimes confrontation is necessary. And when we are willing to confront, it shows our commitment to justice. All right. Worship team, why don't you go ahead and come forward as I just kind of close things up with a couple of thoughts. So we see in this passage that there are blessings that God has given us in the human experience. Blessings in all of it, in the extremes of both ends, but also in the middle. There is a time for new life, and there's a time for life to end. That is the blessing of life. There is a time to end, and there's a time to begin or restart. That's the blessing of change. There's a time for sorrow, and there is a time for joy, and that's the blessing of emotions. And there's a time for closeness and a time for letting go. That's the blessing of relationship. There's a time to pursue passion and a time to surrender it, which is the blessing of purpose. There's a time to defend our rights and a time to concede them. It's the blessing of conflict. And there's a time to enjoy just rule and a time to confront injustice. And that is the blessing of justice. All of life includes these extremes. And God has blessings for us in both and all of them. May we this year, as we engage in the seasons that come, may we not be afraid of the challenges that come. May we not be afraid. May we not label the things that we don't like just evil or bad. But may we be willing to engage in those times of change and those times of sorrow, those times of even hate and war and conflict. May we engage in them recognizing that God has given them to us and that he has a blessing for us in them. God is not surprised by what we are going to face this year. He has gone before us. He's there and he's waiting. So no matter what life brings, may we boldly step in to that experience, knowing that in it, God is there, ready and waiting to bless us. Let's take some time to continue to worship in song.